Have you ever imagined being someone else before you were born and remembering details so vivid that they shock everyone around you? And what if I told you there's a documented case where a child said exactly who he was in another life, with physical evidence and testimonies? Would you believe it? If you want to uncover one of the most intriguing modern reincarnation cases ever recorded, subscribe to the channel now, because what comes next will challenge everything you think about life, death, and the soul. If you're not subscribed yet, click on subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any content. Was Titu really the reincarnation of a murdered man? Or was it all just coincidence, induced memory, or pure invention? Who were Stevenson and Antonia Mills? To understand the importance of this story, we need to go back a bit. Stevenson was a Canadian-American psychiatrist who became a world reference in the study of reincarnation. He traveled through several countries, interviewing children who claimed to remember past lives. The difference in Stevenson's work was his method. He recorded names, dates, locations, verified medical records, and cross-checked testimonies. Over decades, he investigated more than 2,000 cases. His critics accused him of giving credibility to children's stories. But his supporters saw him as a pioneer who approached the phenomenon with scientific rigor. Stevenson knew he was entering controversial territory, but he believed these accounts could reveal something profound about consciousness. It was in this context that Antonia Mills, a professor at the University of Northern British Columbia in Canada, decided to apply the same methodology in independent investigations. She traveled to India, where beliefs in reincarnation are common, but she tried to maintain as much neutrality as possible. Among the 10 cases she studied, one stood out. That of Torin or Titu Singh, a boy who seemed to carry very specific memories of a man named Suresh Verma. The birth of Titu. Titu was born in Badh, a small village near Agra in the state of Uttar Pradesh, India. He was the youngest child in a large family. His older siblings were more than 10 years older, which meant he was treated with special attention from an early age. There is still an unresolved doubt about his date of birth. Hospital documents indicate December 11, 1982, but his parents claim he was born on December 10, 1983. It might seem like a small detail, but that one-year difference changes the entire interpretation of the case. If he was born in 1982, then he was already 8 months old when the man he claimed to remember was murdered in August 1983. If he was born in 1983, he came into the world 4 months after Suresh Verma's death, which fits better with the traditional idea of reincarnation. From a very young age, Titu began saying things that left everyone confused. He insisted he had another home somewhere else. He said he didn't understand how he ended up in a poor family since he used to live in a large, comfortable house with his own car and elegant clothes. Among the most striking statements, he would say things like, "Ask my grandfather to take care of my wife and children. My house was in Agra, not here in Badh. I had a radio shop and I was a big businessman." For his parents, it was frightening to hear a 3- or 4-year-old boy talk like an adult, worried about family and business responsibilities. The weight of the memories. As he grew older, his statements became even more detailed. He mentioned names of relatives his parents had never heard of. He constantly complained about the poverty he lived in, comparing it to the riches of his previous life.
He said he had siblings named Rajababu and Sushila, names that seemed invented but were later confirmed. At first, his parents tried to ignore it. They thought it was childish imagination or words picked up from conversations, but the boy insisted, repeating the same names and situations. The case took a new turn when he said, "I am the owner of Suresh Radio." This statement stood out because it wasn't vague. He identified himself as the owner of a store with a specific name located in Agra. Titu's older brother decided to investigate. He traveled to Agra and found the store, Suresh Radio, which really existed, located in Sadar Bazaar. The shop was being run by the widow of Suresh Verma, who had been murdered on August 28, 1983. From then on, the case took on greater proportions. Suresh's family heard about the story and decided to visit Titu's village to verify it. What happened next left everyone stunned. When he saw Suresh's widow, the boy ran towards her and called her his wife. He recognized Suresh's parents and siblings, citing names that no one had told him. To top it off, he described intimate details of Suresh's married life, including a walk where they bought sweets at a fair, a memory that only the widow confirmed. Marks on the body. If a child's words could be dismissed as imagination, there was something that couldn't be ignored. The marks on his body. Suresh Verma had been killed by gunshots to the head. The autopsy report clearly showed an entry wound and an exit wound from the bullet. When Titu's hair was cut very short, 2 rounded and deep marks were revealed on his scalp exactly in the same places described in the medical records. These marks were present from birth and were not simple scars. They were visible deformities, as if the skin had been marked from the inside. In addition to these 2, there were 3 other small marks on the back of his head that didn't exactly match the wound, but added even more mystery. This physical detail made the case much harder to explain as mere coincidence or imagination. The puzzle of the dates. If Titu was born in 1982, as some documents show, then he was already 8 months old when Suresh was murdered. That would imply that his soul entered after birth, a rare hypothesis, but one discussed by some researchers called late entry of the soul. If he was born in 1983, then he came into the world 4 months after Suresh Verma's death, which fits better with the traditional idea of reincarnation. But if so, how could his birthmarks correspond to injuries that only happened months earlier? This question was never resolved and remains one of the reasons the T2 case is considered unique. Reactions and investigations. The story spread not only among neighbors, but also among researchers. Antonia Mills carefully documented every detail, interviewing both families, checking medical records, comparing dates, and collecting testimonies. She concluded there was no simple explanation. Fraud seemed unlikely since Titu's family was humble and had no reason to invent such a complex story. Contact between the 2 families only occurred after the boy began talking about his past life. Critics suggested that Titu's father might have read reports about Suresh's case and somehow influenced his son. However, Mills checked the newspapers from the time and confirmed that although there were articles about the murder, intimate details about relatives and specific events were not included in them. Recognition by the family. The most striking moment was the meeting between Titu and Suresh's family. He correctly identified Suresh's 2 children among several others. He recognized siblings and described changes made to the Suresh radio shop after its owner's death, such as wall painting and furniture rearrangements. For those present, it was as if they were witnessing a continuity of life that was impossible to explain. Many cried, torn between the pain of remembrance and the strangeness of the situation. Final reflection of the block. A little boy claimed to be someone else, described his old home, recognized relatives he had never seen, talked about businesses and adult responsibilities, and carried birthmarks corresponding to the murder of the man he said he once was. How would you explain this? Was it just coincidence, family suggestion, or proof that something exists beyond the physical body?
Have you ever stopped to think about what you would do if a 3-year-old child suddenly began revealing names, places, and even a violent death they could never have known? That is exactly the case of Taurin Titu Singh, and what makes this story even more extraordinary is that it was closely followed by researchers who were looking for concrete evidence of reincarnation. If you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now and turn on the notification bell because what you're about to hear is not fiction, but one of the most well-documented accounts in history. Can science explain what happened to Titu Singh? Or are we facing something that goes completely beyond human understanding? Who was Suresh Verma? To understand Titu's connection with his supposed past, it's necessary to know the life of Suresh Verma. He was the owner of Suresh Radio, a shop in Agra specializing in electronic equipment. Suresh was known as a successful businessman, but also as someone involved in smuggling, a practice that brought him both wealth and dangerous enemies. On August 28, 1983, Suresh was shot dead, leaving behind a wife and children. The crime was recorded by the police and briefly reported in local newspapers, but without mentioning intimate family details. That point is key. If the information wasn't in the news, how could a boy from another village know about it? Titu's memories. From an early age, Titu insisted that his true home was not the humble house in Bad, but a large house in Agra. He complained about poverty, spoke of a wife, children, and a prosperous life. His parents were frightened. They couldn't understand how such a young child could have such adult-like thoughts. What stood out most was the natural way he spoke. To him, this wasn't imagination, it was vivid memory, as if he had truly lived another life. He described the house, the shop, and even specific situations like meals and outings. The revelation of Suresh Radio. Everything changed when Titu declared, "I am the owner of Suresh Radio." His older brother went to Agra and found the shop. The owner had been Suresh Verma, murdered months earlier. This raised suspicions that the boy could be the reincarnation of the businessman. When the Verma family heard the story, they traveled to Bad to see for themselves. The meeting was shocking. Titu recognized Suresh's widow, calling her his wife, identified the children, and greeted relatives by name. Even more astonishing, he described outings and intimate situations only the family could have known. The impact on the families. The Singh family didn't know how to handle it. There was pride in seeing their son recognized as someone special, but also fear of losing him to the Vermas. The Verma family, on the other hand, lived between grief and hope. To relive Suresh through a child was disturbing, but it also brought comfort. The widow, Uma, reportedly wept when hearing Titu recall moments she had shared only with her husband. To her, it was impossible that anyone from outside could have access to such details. Physical marks. One of the most mysterious aspects were the marks on Titu's body. Suresh had been killed by gunshots to the head. The autopsy clearly documented the wounds. And on Titu's scalp were identical marks, present since birth. They weren't ordinary scars, but deep depressions in the skin, difficult to explain. For researchers like Ian Stevenson and Antonia Mills, this kind of coincidence reinforced the reincarnation hypothesis. In many documented cases, children who remembered past lives bore marks corresponding to the way they had died. The dilemma of the dates. Titu's birth date is central. If he was born in December 1982, he was already alive when Suresh died in August 1983. This would suggest a replacement of the soul, a rare and little discussed phenomenon. If he was born in December 1983, he came into the world 4 months after Suresh's death, fitting the classic pattern of reincarnation. But here lies the problem. The marks were already present. How could they correspond to injuries from a death that occurred months earlier? This dilemma was never resolved and is one of the reasons the case remains so debated. Antonia Mills and the investigation. Antonia Mills applied Stevenson's methods to Titu's case. She interviewed both families, analyzed medical documents, and compared accounts. What impressed her most was the accuracy of the information provided by the boy. Names of relatives, family habits, and details of the shop were not in newspapers or public conversations. Mills concluded that Titu's case was one of the strongest she had ever studied. Even recognizing the possibility of errors, she believed the reincarnation hypothesis was more plausible than any other explanation. Other investigations for comparison. Mills did not study only Titu. She investigated other similar cases in India where children claimed to have lived before. In many of them, the details were vague or hard to confirm. What set Titu apart was the combination of factors: specific memories, recognition of people, physical marks, and independent documentation. Few cases brought all these elements together so clearly. This comparison further strengthened Mills' position. For her, Titu represented a rare example capable of convincing even the most skeptical that something real might be happening. Criticism and skepticism. Despite everything, critics proposed alternative hypotheses. Some suggested that Titu's father might have read reports about Suresh and, even unintentionally, passed information to his son. Others pointed out that in cultures where reincarnation is a strong belief, any childish remark can be interpreted as a memory of a past life. These criticisms are important because they show that science has not yet unanimously accepted such phenomena. However, even skeptics acknowledge that Titu's case presents coincidences that are difficult to explain by imagination alone. International repercussion. The case gained international attention. The BBC produced reports, and researchers from different countries traveled to India to learn about the story. Titu became a kind of symbol for reincarnation research, even though his family did not want so much exposure. To them, he was just an ordinary boy, but to the world, he represented possible proof that life does not end with death. Final reflection of the block. The case of Titu Singh is extraordinary because it brings together all the elements researchers consider fundamental: specific memories, recognition of people, physical marks, and independent documentation. Few cases brought all these elements together so clearly. But the question remains, is this enough to prove reincarnation? Or are we simply facing an impressive coincidence reinforced by India's culture and social context? While you reflect on this, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to follow the next parts. There is still much to explore about the scientific and spiritual hypotheses surrounding this story.
Have you ever wondered what would happen if a reincarnation case were taken so seriously that it challenged modern science? That is exactly what happened with the case of Titu Singh. The impact was not limited to the village where he was born or the city of Agra. Researchers, journalists, and people from different cultures began to discuss what this case meant for the understanding of life and death. If you haven't subscribed yet, take a moment to do so now and activate the notifications, because what we're about to explore will show you why Titu's case is still debated decades later. Is there really life after death, or can everything be explained by the human mind? The weight of Indian culture. In India, the idea of reincarnation is a core part of culture. From an early age, children grow up hearing stories of rebirth, karma, and past lives. This creates an environment more open to interpreting children's statements as memories of another life. However, it is important to note that not every Indian child talks about past lives. In fact, documented cases are a minority. And even when they occur, not all come with verifiable details. What makes Titu different is the consistency of his words, the physical evidence, and the independent verification by researchers. While some critics claim cultural beliefs may influence interpretation, Titu's case brings elements that go beyond religion. After all, specific birthmarks and personal recognition cannot be explained only by cultural influence. The importance of the scientific method. Stevenson was criticized by many, but his contribution was bringing a method to the study of reincarnation. He did not accept stories without documentation. He interviewed multiple witnesses, checked official records, and cross-verified information. Antonia Mills followed the same path in Titu's case. She sought to reduce any chance of fraud or suggestion. The method involved noting down the child's first statements before any contact with the supposed previous family. Then, she compared them with documents, testimonies, and police records. In Titu's case, most of the details were confirmed before there was any contact between the families. This rigor gave credibility to the case, allowing it to be cited in academic articles and international debates on consciousness and life after death. Scientific and psychological hypotheses. Several specialists tried to explain Titu's case without resorting to reincarnation. Some of the hypotheses included genetic memory inheritance, the idea that memories could be passed down through genes. However, this doesn't explain how a boy could inherit so specific details of someone unrelated. Cryptomnesia, when someone recalls information they once heard but thinks it is original. Perhaps Titu overheard details about Suresh, but the sheer accuracy and number of details weaken this explanation. Coincidence. Skeptics claim extraordinary coincidences can happen, but the accumulation of names, places, physical marks, and recognition of people makes this hard to accept for many scholars. Family suggestion. Maybe parents or neighbors influenced the boy, but accounts show Titu's statements started before any contact with the Verma family. These hypotheses show science's attempt to give natural explanations, but none managed to close the debate. Comparisons with other cases. To better understand, it's worth comparing Titu with other reincarnation cases. Stevenson documented the case of Shanti Devi in New Delhi, a girl who recalled her previous life in Mathura and recognized family members and places with accuracy. Even political leaders of the time paid attention to her story. Another famous case was James Leininger in the United States, a 2-year-old boy with memories of being a World War II pilot. He described airplanes, colleagues' names, and battle sites later confirmed by historical records. What makes Titu special is the combination of all elements: detailed memories, recognition of people, and physical marks that corresponded exactly to Suresh Verma's fatal wounds. Few cases worldwide bring all these aspects together. The question of birthmarks. Researchers like Stevenson collected more than 200 cases where birthmarks or congenital defects matched fatal injuries from past lives. This became one of the most intriguing lines of research. In Titu's case, what is striking is that the marks were located exactly where the bullet had entered and exited. If they were ordinary scars, they could be attributed to pregnancy complications. But the resemblance to medically documented wounds left the impression that there was something beyond chance. This detail is often used as physical evidence of reincarnation. Media coverage. The case did not remain confined to academic publications. Local and international media immediately became interested. Reports were published in India, and later outlets like the BBC produced programs about Titu's story. This helped popularize the case, but also brought challenges. Titu's family did not want his life turned into a spectacle. The excess of curiosity and journalists' visits caused strain, but also ensured the story was recorded by multiple independent sources. Such wide documentation protected the case against accusations of invention, since newspapers, TV shows, and researchers all left records. Spiritual impact. For those who believe in life after death, Titu's case is powerful confirmation. It suggests consciousness can survive and even return in a new body. For Indian religious traditions, the case reinforced the concept of karma, where each life continues from the previous one. For people in Western cultures, where reincarnation is not a dominant belief, the story was shocking and thought-provoking. Many who came across it began to question their own convictions. Some who had never believed in reincarnation admitted they considered the possibility after learning about Titu. This cultural contrast is fascinating. In the East, the story was received almost as confirmation of something expected. In the West, it was seen as a challenge to traditional beliefs about the soul and afterlife. Unanswered questions. Even after decades, the case has not been fully explained. Some questions remain open. How can we explain the accuracy of Titu's memories? How do we interpret birthmarks that matched fatal wounds? Why do contradictory birth dates make the case even more mysterious? To what extent did Indian culture influence the interpretation, and to what extent do the facts speak for themselves? These unresolved questions keep the case alive today, cited in books, articles, and documentaries. The skeptic's view. Skeptics insist there is no conclusive proof of reincarnation. For Titu, the case is fascinating, but only a mix of coincidences and biased interpretations. Still, even some critics admit the case is hard to completely dismiss. The combination of memories, recognition, and physical marks creates a barrier against overly simplistic explanations. Titu's legacy. Titu's case not only impressed those who lived close to him, but also left a lasting legacy for reincarnation research. He is cited in academic works, lectures, and TV programs as one of the strongest cases worldwide. More than that, he inspired new generations of researchers to study children's memories and phenomena related to consciousness. The legacy is also spiritual. For many, Titu became a symbol of the continuity of the soul. For others, a reminder that we still know very little about the human mind. Closing of the block. The case of Titu Singh crosses the boundaries of science and spirituality. It shows how a child's simple statements can turn into an investigation capable of challenging everything we believe about life. But the question remains, are stories like this definitive proof of reincarnation, or are we still just facing impressive coincidences and distorted memories? While you reflect, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the continuation of this investigation.
In the next block, we will delve deeper into the debates and show how cases like Titu's impacted scientists, religious leaders, and ordinary people around the world.
Have you ever stopped to think about what a single case can reveal about the nature of consciousness? What does it mean when a child describes memories of a past life in rich detail, recognizes people they have never met, and carries on their body marks corresponding to another person's death? If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Turn on notifications too, because this block will explore the profound consequences of Titu Singh's case. Is the mind merely a product of the brain, or are we dealing with something much greater? The dilemma between science and spirituality. The case of Titu Singh is not just a curiosity. It stands at the crossroads between science and spirituality. On one side, researchers like Antonia Mills tried to apply scientific methods to analyze the facts. On the other, spiritual traditions, such as Hinduism, saw in the case confirmation of ancient beliefs. This dilemma shows how such phenomena challenge boundaries. Science demands measurable, repeatable evidence. Spirituality, in turn, sees these accounts as subjective experience, yet no less real. The clash between these two perspectives is what keeps the case alive to this day. The psychological perspective also entered the debate. Some specialists tried to understand Titu through the workings of a child's mind. Small children have fertile imaginations and can create elaborate stories. But does that explain recognizing strangers? Cognitive psychology suggests false memories can form through environmental influence. However, Titu's statements were documented before any contact with the Verma family, and the physical marks remain a challenge, impossible to dismiss with psychological explanations alone. This impasse shows how the case goes beyond the known limits of the human mind. Reactions in the local community. In Bod, Titu's birthplace, the case caused immediate commotion. Villagers began to see him as special. Some saw it as a blessing, others as a burden. His behavior also divided opinions. While some admired his confidence when speaking of his past life, others feared negative spiritual consequences. In Agra, where the Verma family lived, the impact was even greater. The widow and children of Suresh were confronted with an unexpected reality. A boy from another village recognized intimate details of their lost life. The encounter deeply moved them. International repercussions. When Western researchers gained access to the case, interest multiplied. The BBC produced reports with family interviews and photographs of Titu's birthmarks. For Western audiences, accustomed to a materialist view of life, the story was shocking. Many viewers admitted they began to consider reincarnation as a real possibility for the first time. This international attention turned the case into a key reference in books and documentaries about reincarnation. Even today, when the subject is raised, Titu Singh's name appears alongside other classic cases. Philosophy and existential implications. If we accept that Titu truly lived as Suresh Verma in another life, deep questions arise. What does this mean for our identity? Are we merely a sequence of memories that shift from body to body? If reincarnation is real, what happens to our choices, responsibilities, and family ties? These questions show why cases like this go beyond curiosity. They touch how we understand who we are and where we are going. Different religious interpretations. Each tradition interprets Titu's case differently. Hinduism, confirmation of karma and the continuity of the soul. Buddhism, evidence that consciousness can manifest in new bodies, even if the personal identity is not exactly the same. Christianity traditionally rejects reincarnation, though some spiritualist Christian groups see the case as evidence of truths beyond standard doctrine.
Spiritualism, following Allan Kardec, takes the case as a clear demonstration of universal reincarnation and the soul's multiple existences. These perspectives reveal how a single phenomenon can be absorbed in distinct ways depending on cultural and religious contexts. Criticisms and controversies. Despite all its intriguing elements, the case was not free of controversies. Some argued details may have been exaggerated over time. Others point to the lack of immediate records of Titu's first words. And the issue of his birth date remains critical. Since there's no consensus, skeptics claim it leaves room for misinterpretation. Still, few cases present such a strong combination of memories, recognition, and physical evidence. Influence on further research. After Titu's case, more researchers began investigating similar accounts. Many found children who claimed past lives, but most cases did not gain the same impact. Titu's example served as a methodological reference. Scholars started carefully documenting first statements, photographing birthmarks, and interviewing families at different times. This helped build a larger database, reinforcing the idea that these phenomena are not isolated, but appear across cultures. The challenge to materialist science. Titu's case challenges the materialist scientific view that the mind is only a product of the brain. If that were so, how do we explain memories that seem to come from another life? Materialist researchers argue we don't yet fully understand the child's mind, and it's premature to attribute everything to reincarnation. Still, they struggle to provide convincing explanations for all the details. This reveals a frontier of human knowledge, something science has not yet been able to fit into its models. Reflections on identity and continuity. The case also forces us to rethink identity. If Titu remembered being Suresh, who was he truly? A child living a new life, or the continuation of a man who died violently? This raises existential dilemmas. What remains with us from one life to another? Memory, character, destiny? Such reflections show that reincarnation cases are not just curious stories, but windows into deeper questions that challenge our worldview. East versus West. Another key aspect is the cultural contrast. In India and much of the East, the story was naturally accepted as confirmation of existing beliefs. Titu was simply another example of the soul's journey. In the West, however, the story clashed with traditional beliefs and fueled debates in universities, churches, and television. This contrast highlights how our cultural background shapes the way we interpret reality. The power of personal stories. More than statistics or reports, what moves people are personal stories. Seeing a child recognize a previous family or bear marks of a past death creates a powerful impact. Stories like Titu's carry strength because they unite the mystery of the unexplained with raw human emotion, narratives that cross cultures and awaken universal curiosity. Block closing. The case of Titu Singh is not just an individual enigma. It is a mirror of our deepest questions about life, death, and the continuity of the soul. It shows how a single boy from a small village in India can shake scientific and religious convictions worldwide. And you? What do you think? Is reincarnation real, and are cases like this definitive proof, or are they just extraordinary coincidences? As you reflect, subscribe now and turn on notifications. In the next block, we'll go even deeper into this debate, exploring scholars' conclusions and the broader impacts this case had on how we think about life after death. Have you ever wondered if science will one day be able to definitively prove the existence of reincarnation? That's the question that arises every time cases like Titu Singh's are discussed in conferences, universities, and debate panels. If you haven't subscribed yet, take the opportunity now and activate the notification bell, because what we're about to explore could change the way you see life and death. Are we on the verge of a revolution in how we understand human consciousness?
The case as a scientific challenge. Researchers who analyzed Titu's case emphasize that it cannot be ignored. Details like physical marks, specific memories, and recognition of people make skeptical explanations limited. However, science requires any phenomenon to be repeatable, testable, and measurable. Reincarnation, by its nature, escapes those parameters. It manifests in individual, often unique experiences. This leaves scientists with a dilemma. How do you study something that cannot be reproduced in a lab? Universities and academic debates. Despite the difficulties, cases like Titu's have reached classrooms. In courses on psychology, philosophy, and even medicine, his story is cited as an example of phenomena that challenge paradigms. Some universities use the case to debate the limits of science. Does everything have to be explained only through quantitative methods? Or do we need new ways of investigating consciousness-related phenomena? Professors report that when presenting the case, many students are intrigued. Some reject it outright, but others admit that faced with so many coincidences, the hypothesis of reincarnation deserves at least consideration. The religious perspective. While science debates, religions find in the case an opportunity to reinforce their teachings. For Hinduism and Spiritism, Titu's case is almost a living proof that the soul survives. For stricter Christian traditions, it challenges traditional interpretations of life after death. In spiritual gatherings, Titu Singh's name appears as an example that the soul knows no boundaries and can be reborn where least expected. In Buddhism, such cases reinforce the idea that consciousness has no fixed owner, but flows into different bodies as part of a continuous cycle. In Islamic communities, where reincarnation is not a dominant belief, the case was received with caution but still sparked discussions about the nature of the soul. Influence on ordinary people. Perhaps the greatest impact is not on science or religion, but on everyday people. Those who watched documentaries about Titu often reported reflecting more deeply on their own lives. Some began to believe that illnesses, talents, or phobias might be linked to past experiences. Others started living with more responsibility, believing their present actions could have consequences in future lives. This shows that reincarnation stories go beyond academic study. They touch daily life and reshaped personal perspectives. A turning point. Specialists suggest we may be at a turning point in consciousness studies. Neuroscience advances quickly, but it still cannot clearly explain what the mind truly is. Cases like Titu's push the debate beyond the brain, raising the possibility that consciousness exists independently of the physical body. If that's true, then death may not be the end, but merely a transition. As challenging as that idea is, it gives hope to millions searching for answers to the ultimate question: what happens after we die? Comparison with other evidence. Researchers remind us that Titu's case is not isolated. Similar cases have been reported worldwide, with children recalling past lives in detail. The difference is that Titu's account contained all the key elements: memories, recognition, physical marks, and independent documentation, making it emblematic. When compared with other cases, Titu's story appears as a central piece in a larger puzzle. Perhaps when we combine stories from around the globe, we may discover a clearer pattern about consciousness and life beyond death. Reincarnation in popular culture. Another impact of Titu's case is how reincarnation has been portrayed in books, films, and documentaries. Stories of children remembering past lives began to appear on TV productions, fueling even more public interest. By transforming these accounts into emotional narratives, pop culture spread the idea of the soul's continuity to millions who might not have ever encountered academic research. This shows the influence of such cases is not just scientific or religious, it is cultural, shaping how society imagines what lies beyond death.
The psychological impact. Cases like Titu's also raise important psychological questions. People who believe they've lived past lives often report a greater sense of purpose, but they may also carry traumas from earlier experiences. Psychologists studying regression therapy affirm that, whether real or not, believing in past lives can profoundly affect behavior and worldview. In Titu's case, simply rejecting his biological family and insisting he belonged to another life revealed how such memories can affect relationships and personal identity. Final reflection of the block. The case of Titu Singh remains one of the most impactful accounts of reincarnation ever documented. It challenges scientists, inspires believers, and touches ordinary people's hearts. But the question endures. Are we facing real evidence of the soul's continuity or just extraordinary coincidences that defy easy explanation? And what about you? Have you ever thought about what it would mean if your memories did not end with your death, but continued in another body, in another life? Subscribe to the channel and activate notifications, because in the next block, we'll conclude this journey with powerful reflections on Titu Singh's legacy and what it teaches us about life, death, and human destiny.